Welcome to the Well-Seasoned Librarian podcast. My name is Dean Jones, your host, and this is Season 6, Episode 20. This is going to be the last episode of the season, and today I'm interviewing Sari Kamin, who is the Public Programs Director of MOFAD, Museum of Food and Drink in New York. And she also had her own podcast as well called Food Without Borders that ran for well over a year, and she had some amazing guests on. That's from Heritage Radio Network. You can still listen to it on podcast and on Spotify and iTunes as well. So I recommend that highly because it was really excellent. I really enjoyed getting a chance to talk to Sari. She was a great guest, and she had a lot of interesting, information about food writing and the Museum of Food and Drink. And I really enjoyed getting to have a chance to talk to her. So I'm going to go right to this conversation without further ado. Welcome to the Well-Seasoned Librarian program. My name is Dean Jones. I'm the host, and today I'm talking to Sari Kamin, the Public Programs Director for the Museum of Food and Drink, MOFAD. Sari, thank you for being on the program.
Thank you for having me.
So, Sari, tell our listeners who are not familiar with you a little bit about your work and yourself.
Sure. Well, I apologize. You might hear my 4-month-old in the background a little bit.
That's totally fine. We love kids.
I'm the Public Programs Director at MOFAD. We're the Museum of Food and Drink. We're based in New York City. We're a bit of an unconventional museum in that we do not have a permanent physical space. We're quite itinerant. Right now we have an exhibition open at the Africa Center, which is technically in Harlem in New York. It's right at 110th Street at the top of the park. And I do programs for the museum, which means, I'm responsible for creating basically all of our public-facing content that is separate from the exhibitions. So all the events in the evenings, we do a lot of in-person events now that the pandemic has receded, and we do a lot of virtual events, which we started doing March 2020, the pandemic started. So I kind of do a bit of both. We do hybrid programs, and it's really wonderful, fulfilling work, and I'm really grateful for it.
Now, you also have done an enormous amount of food writing, and you're very well known for that, as well as a very wonderful podcast that you did. So I want to ask you, like many food writers I talk to, everybody seems to have a similar vein where they, as children, were very interested in food, or young people, they're very interested in food. Were you like that at all growing up?
Not really. I didn't really get into food until I moved to New York City in my very early 20s, hoping to be involved in the theater. I went to college and for undergrad to study theater, and I really dreamed of being an actor and a director. So like so many people, I moved to New York with that pursuit in mind, and found myself working in restaurants, which is, a very boring, typical story for, I think, many, many people on a similar track. And I worked in restaurants for about a decade, and it was there that I really developed my interest in food. I had not spent too much time thinking about what happens in the back of the house. And, I got some pretty great education. I learned about wine. I learned about a little bit about sourcing. Like, I'd never spent too much time thinking about where our food comes from. So that was really eye-opening for me. And after about almost a decade of working in restaurants and kind of accepting that the theater thing wasn't happening, I knew it was really time to make a shift in what my career could be. And I was excited to keep working in food, but I knew I didn't ultimately want to stay in a restaurant. So it was looking into what the options were. It was a while ago, before, food media had exploded. I didn't want to be a chef, and I discovered the NYU Food Studies program, and that's what kind of opened all the doors and shifted my interests in terms of a career. And I started thinking about food as culture.
Now, you had your own podcast, Food Without Borders, for Heritage Radio Network. And it was a really magnificent podcast that had a lot of amazing guests on. Can you tell us about that and what that experience was like for you?
Yeah, I started working at Heritage Radio as an intern when I was in grad school. And the first podcast I worked on before Food Without Borders was about restaurants. It was about chefs. It was pretty irreverent. We definitely didn't take ourselves too seriously, and it was a great time and gave me great experience to be a podcast host. But after the election, when Trump was elected president, I was really affected and not very
Yeah,
motivated to go in and interview chefs, and I kind of just felt like this doesn't feel as meaningful and important at this moment. So I took a little time and thought about, if I were to continue working on a podcast, what would that podcast look like in the context of what had just happened in America? And everything was happening with the travel ban and all that like anti-immigrant rhetoric.
yeah,
And I developed Food Without Borders as a way to center immigrants working in food and talk about how food is a connection to heritage and identity. So I wanted to, give people a platform to tell that story, but also just ask them and say, how are you doing? How does it feel right now? And how are you using food as a way to introduce yourselves, tell your story, and stay connected to wherever you immigrated from.
have you thought about going back to the podcast at any time?
No, not at this time. I did the podcast for a while, and it was before I worked at MOFAD, and it was really a wonderful opportunity and felt very timely in that moment. And not that like things are perfect by any stretch of the imagination in this country, but certainly the temperature has shifted. So it just doesn't feel it's there are so many other podcasts right now happening at Heritage Radio,
Yeah,
and it's great to be able to make space for them as well. I think climate change is such an important issue that's getting a lot of attention, and I
absolutely.
think it's great that Heritage Radio has a revolving door in some ways in terms of what podcasts are there. I mean, there's certainly stalwarts, but it is, there's flexibility, and that's important because things are always changing, and what the pressing issues as they relate to food are always changing as well.
Yes.
And my work with MoFad is really similar in a way.
Yeah,
I'm curating conversations ultimately, so
true.
in that way it's the same type of work, and I really love what I get to do at MoFad because I get to remove myself from those conversations, and I actually do feel like that is my real talent, like being able to identify who the speaker should be and step out of that conversation, and give other folks a platform. And luckily, MoFad is an organization that aims to center immigrants, people of color, and other marginalized folks who don't always necessarily get the attention they deserve from food media. And I'm really proud of that work. So it very much is in the same kind of ethos of what I wanted to do with the podcast. So it feels a little bit redundant to do both. And just because, there's only so much time that any person has,
Yeah, that's true.
it's important for me to be able to like focus my time right now on that work because it's very time consuming.
Oh yeah, it is. Yeah, I could totally get that. So as the public programs director at MoFad, what is your day like? What kind of things do you do there? Walk us through a typical day for you.
I'm really on my computer most of the day on email. I'm working from home as so many people are. MoFad doesn't have an office space at this moment. We moved spaces in terms of like where the exhibition was going to be right at the beginning of the pandemic in March 2020, but because of the nature of the world, we had the exhibition slated to open then, but it didn't open, and then it was delayed for 2.5 years. We just opened the exhibition this past March, so we were all working from home anyway, and just I think as so many businesses did realize that was a completely viable way to work. So there hasn't been an urgent need to change that. So I'm pretty autonomous in how I work because I am the sole member of our programs team. So yeah, I spend a lot of time on email and thinking about what our programs are or could be. So a lot of it is just brainstorming and imagining and fantasizing about what programs are. And then also receiving emails, because sometimes I get wonderful pitches from people who have great ideas for programs. So the way that the programs come to be is kind of a mix of me creating them or me saying, yes, I would love to do that. And because we are itinerant and don't have a permanent space, right now we have the exhibition, like I said, at the Africa Center, where there are programs happening, but we're only going to be there until June. So I'm thinking ahead right now, where will our programs be once we're no longer based at the Africa Center? So part of my job is not just conceiving of the programs, but conceiving of where they will be. So there's a lot of different partnerships happening. We're simultaneously doing programs right now at the Ace Hotel Brooklyn. So I'm working on developing those and continuing to cultivate our partnership and relationships there. We have a program coming up at Essex Market in New York City. We have some new spaces that we're potentially doing programs at. We're looking at Chelsea Market as a possibility. We have a program in a new space at a hotel in Midtown that's going to be in June. We're maybe doing some partnering with the Museum of the City in New York, because they have a food exhibition opening in the fall. So there's really a lot of different moving parts, in addition to the virtual programs that we do over Zoom. So it's a lot of planning and a lot of scheduling. A lot of my job is saying, hey, are you available at this time? And then trying to like coordinate people's schedules, which is the least sexy part of my job, but very much part of it.
This episode is sponsored by Culinary Historians of Northern California, a Bay Area educational group dedicated to the study of food, drink, and culture in human history. To learn more about this organization and their work, please visit their website at www.chnorcal.org. You mentioned we talked about briefly how the Trump nomination or the Trump election caused a lot of our world to be turned on its ear. I know it affected a lot of people negatively, and then it seemed like right after that we got hit with this pandemic that just turned everything on its ear too. I know for me, working with programming in my small way with libraries, it's been a real kind of rethink with everything. What's it been like for you? It sounds like from what you just said that you've had to kind of scramble and reinvent a lot of things. Has it been particularly challenging for MOFAD to kind of redirect the programming because of the pandemic?
Absolutely. I mean, we really had to start from scratch and think about what programming was once the pandemic shut everything down. I don't think I'd ever heard of Zoom before March 2020. And yeah, our organization changed a lot. Like so many small nonprofit organizations, we did unfortunately have to downsize. And at that moment, I was told that, I was luckily staying on the team, but I was not just the program director anymore, but truly the online program director and responsible for all public facing content, because there was no exhibition, that was going to be opening anytime soon. So figuring out what that looked like was very, very challenging. I mean, at first, I think we were just doing stuff on Instagram. We were doing some Instagram lives. We were doing a food, what was it called? It was like a food challenge, kind of in the vein of Chopped, but like geared towards quarantine, where, everyone had whatever they had in their pantry. And we would invite people to email us and say, I have these 4 things in my pantry, like what could we make? And we were, partnering with a chef and not making the dishes, but like discussing what the different possible dishes could be with these limited ingredients. That was really fun. I think the first thing on Zoom I ever did was just an interview series with different folks in the restaurant industry talking about how they were impacted. We talked to chefs, we talked to some farmers, we talked to people in grocery, we looked at sourcing, trying to get perspectives from all over the board and how they were impacted when, just everything was so perilous at that time. And then we started doing Zoom programs. We did a partnership first with Gastro Obscura, which was really helpful because they had done a few. So it kind of eased us into that. And then we, got a little bit more confident. And, one thing I was really excited to do was figure out ways that we could still feel like we were in community, even if we were only connecting over Zoom. So one of the first programs we did was called the Harlem Rent Party. And I really wanted everyone to be able to eat the same meal. So we figured out how to get boxes together that people could order. And it was essentially a food kit. And we had a recipe developed by Chef Omar Tate. And we talked about the history of Harlem Rent Parties with Dr. Jessica B. Harris. And Chef Omar did a cooking demonstration, and we had a cocktail demonstration with Tanya Hopkins. And we even had some singing and performance. And it was a really lovely experience where everyone was cooking and eating the same thing and listening to these stories and drinking these drinks together. And there was some dancing and music at the end. And even though we were on Zoom, there was really a warm, intimate feeling that happened with all these people from all over the country. And that made me realize people were really, really craving connection. And I was really committed to figuring out more ways to do that. So from there, we started doing a lot more programs like that and got a little bit savvier, partnering with different places, figuring out how to get boxes of food or boxes of meal kits, ingredients, drinks, things like that, where we did a lot of different types of programs throughout the 2 years where people at least had the same kind of things they were, consuming.
I've seen a lot of changes in food writing and food media over the years. And it seems like in the last 10 years, there's been a specific turn to showing the intersection between food and society, food and politics, food and science. There's a lot of these intersections going on. And I see this in your writing and in your podcasts. Do you think this is something that has become very powerful to kind of change society? How do you think this is affecting things from what you've seen talking to people?
I mean, I think that, the pandemic just exposed a lot of issues of inequity, that have always been there. It's just that, it was much easier before the pandemic just to turn a cheek and not feel like it mattered. So, I think that is a silver lining of the pandemic, that people really started speaking out, and there was more of a willingness to listen. So yeah, I mean, I do think it's changed food writing in a lot of ways, that there's much more space to talk about the problems. I think people have more of an appetite to listen to things that are difficult and try and want to create some change, as opposed to just want to read not that all stories before the pandemic were fluff stories, but people for a long time in food writing, the narrative was tend to be from the perspective of a white person talking about a recipe. And things have shifted, and there's just a lot more accountability, and I think that's a really, really positive thing. And I think it's wonderful to hear perspectives from a diverse group of people, and I'm glad that different outlets and magazines have made a commitment to diversifying their staffs. But it's been a long time coming, and I only wish it happened sooner and it didn't take such a catastrophic event to shake things up. But that's where we're at.
Are there any writers?
And it could be, there's definitely still room for improvement on that.
Absolutely. Are there any writers or chefs that you're particularly interested in right now or currently reading?
Yeah, I mean, the James Beard Media Awards the nominations were announced yesterday, and there was such a wonderful group of people who got recognized. My pal Osai Endelin is one of my favorite writers, and I'm really happy she got recognized for the cookbook that she co-wrote with Marcus Samuelson. Nick Sharma, who's in the Bay Area, The Flavor Equation, got nominated, which is a beautiful cookbook. He's just so innovative and scientific in the way he thinks about food. Yasmin Khan had an essay that just shattered my heart that she wrote for Vogue about her miscarriage, and it was just so gorgeous and heartbreaking. And I'm so sad for her that she had that experience, but I'm so glad that, you know, that vulnerability was recognized, because that was a really incredibly powerful piece that she wrote. Bryant Terry, who's just been doing amazing work. Black Food, his book that just came out, is so fantastic. And Steven Satterfeld, who runs Whetstone Media and Whetstone Magazine, Whetstone Journal. I mean, I think he's just taking over the world, and I am so here for it. I mean, Whetstone Magazine is it just doesn't get better than that in terms of food storytelling. And, you know, I'm very sad to hear that The Counter is closing or has closed, because they were doing really, really fantastic work in terms of food journalism. And Dr. Cynthia Greenlee, who just got nominated also for 2 James Beard Awards, who's doing writing and editing from them, is so talented. And I just hope she lands somewhere fantastic, because she is so deserving.
So I like to ask this of all my guests, and I know that, you know, right now you're working largely with MOFAD, but what's next for you?
Oh, I don't have plans to leave MOFAD.
Okay. Yeah, I wouldn't suggest that. Yeah, I'm not saying that.
I mean, yes, I love MOFAD. I'm very grateful for my work, and I hope what's next is that someone gives MOFAD a lot of money so we can be around for a very, very, very long time. So if you're listening and you have a lot of money, please give it to MOFAD.
Yeah, please.
We would love it. We need it.
We'll put your contact information in the bio so they can contact you directly.
I mean, we do, like, the long-term goal is a permanent space. So I hope that can happen for MOFAD, where, you know, my job is not figuring out like where all over New York we're doing different programs, like just knowing like this is MOFAD, this is where people can come see our exhibitions and see our programs would be tremendous, because there is no museum of food and drink other than the Southern Food and Beverage Museum, which is focused on Southern food. But
yeah, there
should be, you know, an institution, like a US institution, and we certainly want to be that. But what's next for me is, you know, trying to get my job, trying what matters most in conversations around food. We're certainly having a lot of conversations about, you know, sustainability and conversations to be having. What does the future of food look like? So thinking about that in terms of my career, but, you know, I have a 4-month-old son, so yeah, also being a mom in the meantime, and balancing those things, and you know, trying to create balance in my life. And, you know, both of these things feel quite separate and very time consuming. So making sure I'm good at both of these full-time jobs.
Yeah. I mean, I have a lot of kids, and kind of splitting the work, you know, parenting thing is really, it's draining. It's a lot of work, but it's so worthwhile.
Yeah.
Well, Sari, I want to thank you for being on the program, and I really enjoy getting a chance to talk to you. I hope I get a chance to visit MOFAD one day. It sounds like a really wonderful museum, and I really enjoy getting a chance to talk to you about your podcast and your work and your writing. Thank you for being on the program.
Thank you so much, Dean. It was a pleasure.
Yep. That was my interview with Sari Kamin, from Public Programs Director of the Museum of Food and Drink in New York, and her podcast as well. I had a really great time talking to Sari, and I hope I get a chance to visit the Museum of Food and Drink one day. Please come and listen to our program next week, and we start our 7th season. I can't believe it's been 7 seasons already, but we're going to have some great lineups, and I can't wait to have you hear who we have talking. Next week, we're going to have the Great British Bake Off's contestant, Chetna Macon. She's also a author of several great cookbooks and just putting out a prodigious amount of work. She's a great person. I love talking to her. She also has a wonderful YouTube program. So if you get a chance, tune in on Monday to listen to our talk with Chetna Macon. And then on Friday, we're going to have a friend and fellow author on One Table, One World, Nick Hayward. He's a chef, artist, and writer, designer. I had a really great time talking to Nick about the nitty-gritty of the the kitchen in restaurants, what it's like to work in a kitchen, what it's like to be a chef. That's going to be Nick on Friday. So tune in then for that. I hope you had a really great time listening to this podcast as much as I've enjoyed getting a chance to make it. I really have had a wonderful year and a half or whatever it's been, making the podcast. It's been such a treat for me. And I really hope that you're all enjoying it too. This episode is sponsored by the Culinary Historians of Northern California, a Bay Area educational group dedicated to the study of food, drink, and culture in human history. To learn more about this organization and their work, this is their wonderful organization, please visit their website at www.chnorcal.org. And if you follow my podcast and enjoy it, there's a link on the bio where you can buy me a coffee or a pint at your choice or leave some feedback. You can help us promote this podcast by sharing it with a friend, sending it to somebody you like that might be interested, posting it on social media. If you're on Twitter, you can share the hashtag @WellLibrarian. And you can follow the Well Seasoned podcast on Spotify and iTunes and other places, and they'll send you links and information when a new episode comes out. And our podcast theme song, Talk About Love, is sung by the band Kitty Cat Fan Club. I've been so happy to be able to use this song for my last entire season, and I will continue to use it by permission of Asian Man Records. If you like, go to asianmanrecords.com and see what bands that they cover other than Kitty Cat Fan Club. Buy some merch, buy some albums. You'll enjoy it and have a good time and find out about some great music in the bargain. That being said, I hope you all have a really great week and have a great rest of your week and have a great weekend and keep on cooking.
I've been getting better.